It required exactly 12 minutes for Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to comprehend a crushing reality. She had brought a curriculum based on gender theory to a heavyweight championship involving serious financial policy. Looking back, the red flags were evident the moment she stepped onto that gleaming CNN platform. Waiting there for her was Senator John Kennedy, sporting a grin that appeared charmingly amiable right up until the instant one recognized it as the specific look a domestic feline displays just before depositing a slain rodent at your toes. The tangible proof of his readiness was intimidating. Laid out in front of him on the table was a yellow legal tablet entirely obscured by handwritten scribbles, a dense pile of typed papers positioned ominously on his right, and a coffee cup decorated with the slogan, "I Heart Capitalism." It was an accessory he had obviously transported from his residence simply to present a visual declaration before a solitary word was uttered. The whole occasion was CNN's brainchild, marketed as a pivotal town hall discussion concerning the destiny of America's financial system. They desired sparks, so they summoned one victor from every extreme of the political landscape. In the blue corner sat AOC, embodying the progressive left's broad dream of democratic socialism. In the red corner sat Kennedy, symbolizing classic fiscal conservatism presented with a misleadingly sluggish Southern accent. The studio crowd was flawlessly divided to correspond. Half the chairs were occupied by youthful, spirited progressive campaigners who had probably taken the day off from diverse charity roles to applaud their idol. The remaining portion was comprised of elderly, hardened conservatives who appeared as though they had been contributing federal income levies since prior to AOC's birth. Centered between them sat the facilitator Jake Tapper, appearing noticeably anxious, as though he anticipated the impending disaster, but was helpless to halt it. Tapper commenced the events with what ought to have been an easy inquiry, setting up the subject of rising costs. AOC grabbed the chance, diving instantly into her usual, well-practiced monologue. She talked fervently regarding corporate avarice being the fundamental source of all financial troubles, condemning price hiking and sketching a graphic image of tycoons pilfering wealth from laboring households. She struck every individual one of her arguments with rehearsed accuracy, utilizing the precise keywords that always performed well in minute-long TikTok videos and attracted thousands of eager shares from her followers. The progressive section of the spectators devoured it, cheering vigorously as she concluded her introductory remarks. She appeared self-assured. She believed she was triumphing. Then Senator Kennedy leaned inward, and that amiable predator-like grin expanded merely a sliver. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he started, talking in that syrup-thick Louisiana cadence that makes every phrase appear as if it is being presented alongside a tumbler of sugared tea on a veranda. "That is all truly fascinating, but before we venture too far into the thicket on this, I question if you might assist me with something. You see, I am merely a humble country attorney. Well, I am a senator presently, but I still reason in that manner, and I am experiencing a bit of difficulty tracking your clarification. Could you perform a brief kindness for me and simply specify inflation for me, just so we are all operating with the precise, identical comprehension?" AOC blinked momentarily, confused by the basic nature of the inquiry. She bounced back rapidly, restating her earlier argument with marginally more stress. Inflation is when costs rise due to unchecked corporate avarice. Kennedy cut her off very softly, raising a palm. "No, ma'am. See, that is what you believe generates inflation. That is your hypothesis. I am requesting you to describe what the term inflation truly signifies, the accepted economic explanation. You possess an economics diploma from Boston University, so I am completely positive you studied the textbook meaning back then." The snare had been laid with skillful nuance, and AOC had not even observed the tripwire yet. What transpired over the subsequent few minutes was fated to evolve into the most shared instance in political arguing since the Biden-Palin contests years prior. If you believe that characterization is exaggeration, you must hold on until you witness the actual documents Kennedy placed on the desk. With the painful leisureliness of a hunter who understands its quarry has nowhere to flee, Kennedy extended his arm to his pile of sheets and retrieved a particular paper. He treated it with the greatest care, like a counselor displaying vital, condemning proof in a death penalty case, which, considering his history, made total logic. "Representative," he proceeded, grasping the sheet with both palms, "you finished at Boston University with a certification in economics. That is truly admirable. I myself attended Vanderbilt and Oxford, but I admit I still struggle with long division occasionally." The modest jest elicited a sincere chuckle from the crowd, diffusing the strain for a fleeting moment. "So I am certain, with your vast economics knowledge, you can assist in schooling all of us plain people regarding complicated financial protocols. I am truly anticipating learning something this evening." He raised the record so the lenses could acquire a clear view of it. "This right here is your university grade report. Well, sections of it anyway. The portions that became public information when you submitted for that congressional apprenticeship back in university. The Freedom of Information Act is genuinely a marvelous tool, is it not?" AOC's assured grin wavered slightly. Her gaze flickered to the document. "Now I observe here on this file that you attended Introduction to Macroeconomics during your first year, which is a fine beginning. Then you attended Introduction to Microeconomics your second year, and then, let us see, one advanced level economics option during your third year, and that is all. 3 economics classes in total." Kennedy glanced up from the sheet with amplified bewilderment, creasing his forehead. "That appears a bit sparse for an economics diploma, does it not?" He thumbed through a few additional leaves of the folder. "But I do notice you attended an abundance of other captivating classes. You attended Gender and Sexuality in the Current Era, you attended Intersectionality and Social Justice, and Post-Colonial Hypothesis. All riveting topics, I am positive, but they are not precisely economics, are they?" He retrieved another piece of paper for contrast. "This record details Boston University's genuine degree prerequisites for an economics major. Scholars require a minimum of 12 distinct economics classes, covering econometrics, higher-level micro and macro theory, monetary strategy, and global economics. You attended 3. Your certification is formally in economics and international relations, with a very significant focus on the IR portion." He gazed back down at her score sheet, his digit following a row. "And that Introduction to Microeconomics course, that is the specific one where you study the definitive fundamentals regarding supply and demand arcs, marginal expense, and market balance, the essential construction blocks of the whole field. You earned a C+ in that course, ma'am." The traditionalist portion of the hall began to whisper. The progressive section appeared abruptly ill at ease. Kennedy raised a palm, as though to protect her. "Now, I am not stating a C+ is awful," he proceeded, in that humble tone that somehow rendered the truthful declaration even more crushing. "Heck, I earned a C+ in statistics back at Vanderbilt, and I still succeeded in finishing school. However, the distinction is, I do not go about suggesting to entirely remodel the whole statistical framework of the United States of America based on that C+ comprehension. That would merely be foolish." Ocasio-Cortez, now clearly on the back foot, tried to recapture the story. She aligned her stance and stared straight into the lens, attempting to steer away from her scholastic files. "Senator," she started, "economics is not merely regarding frigid equations, barren charts, or archaic manuals. It is regarding actual humans. It is regarding comprehending the hardships of laboring households and how the present structure fails them. Kennedy did not skip a beat. He bowed his head along with her as though they were in complete accord. "Oh, I concur with you entirely, ma'am," he stated, his pitch lowering a notch into a more grave timbre. "Economics is definitely regarding people. Explicitly, it is regarding the people who forfeit their occupations and their incomes when officials who gained C+s in elementary economics attempt to execute broad strategies they do not truly comprehend. But let us examine your vocational economics mastery more closely. After university, you finished, and then you became a practicing economist, correct?" He halted, permitting the quiet to suspend in the atmosphere for a weighty second. AOC stayed mute, her jaw tightened. "Oh, wait, that is accurate," Kennedy proceeded, tapping his forehead as though just recalling. "You did not do that. You became a barkeeper. Now do not misunderstand me. That is honorable labor. I possess a profound regard for that. My own father possessed a small enterprise, and I was reared to trust that honorable labor is honorable labor regardless of what it is. But, Representative, tending bar and blending beverages is not precisely the identical thing as laboring at the Federal Reserve. You did not become an economist. You did not labor in the high-stakes realm of finance. You did not even become a novice bookkeeper. You dispensed ales and provided cocktails, which demands a collection of talents like people aptitude and multitasking. But those are not the talents necessitated to supervise a national economy." Kennedy reclined in his seat, folding one limb over the other, seeming entirely at ease, while AOC appeared increasingly like she was positioned in an interview chamber. "So let us recap where we stand thus far," he uttered, tallying on his digits. "You attended precisely 3 economics classes in university, you earned a C+ in the most vital basic one, and you never labored a solitary day in the sector of economics or finance in your working existence. And yet here you are suggesting to radically rebuild the complete American economy with a scheme that costs, by some appraisals, $93 trillion. Ma'am, based on those qualifications, I would not permit you to reorganize my hosiery drawer, let alone the motor of the free world." The hall exploded. One section of the spectators burst into booming clapping and shouts of "Tell him, Senator!" while the other section yelled in anger, labeling the comments chauvinistic or patronizing. Jake Tapper gripped his facilitator's table, striving hopelessly to reinstate some appearance of discipline as the volume level surged. AOC's visage was now colored a dark crimson. Her teeth gritted as she paused for the clamor to fade so she could retaliate. She began to part her lips to answer, but Kennedy was not quite done with his introductory barrage. "And just so we are totally lucid, Representative," he appended, leaning over the table toward her, "I am not making fun of barkeepers. I possess nothing but esteem for the hospitality trade. What I am mocking are barkeepers who believe that the history of dispensing a lager somehow certifies them to re-engineer the complete structure of worldwide capitalism. There is a gigantic distinction between the pair, and the American populace merits knowing which one they are receiving." He gazed at the spectators and then back at the lens with a blink. "And folks, trust it or not, that was merely the preparation. I have 7 additional rounds charged and prepared to launch." As the program switched to an advertisement interval, the strain in the hall was tangible. CNN obviously required the duration to digest the absolute ferocity of what was transpiring on their platform. When the lenses went dim, the mood did not chill. If anything, the vibration in the studio grew even more charged. Tapper was observed speaking frantically into his earpiece, arguably getting fresh directions on how to manage a contest that had gone entirely off the tracks of civil political conversation. When they returned from the pause, Tapper attempted to guide the chat toward what he arguably considered safer, more unbiased territory. "Let us debate tax strategy," he proposed, perhaps wishing that a dull conversation of ratios and brackets would decrease the heat. Kennedy brightened instantly, his pupils glimmering with revived curiosity. "Oh, excellent. Taxes. I adore discussing taxes. It is one of my preferred topics." He shifted his focus back to AOC. "Representative, you speak quite a bit regarding the wealthy paying their equitable portion. I actually concur with you entirely on that tenet. Everyone ought to pay exactly what they are due under the statute. I believe we discovered some shared territory there. So with that in mind, let us discuss your excursion to the Met Gala." AOC's eyes expanded slightly. She understood precisely where this was leading, and the shared territory Kennedy cited was clearly a precipice he was about to shove her off. Kennedy reached into his pile of papers and extracted several high-grade, shiny color pictures. "September 2021, he stated, raising them up. "You went to the Met Gala, sporting a very beautiful, very costly-appearing white gown with the phrase, 'Tax the Rich,' emblazoned across the rear in massive crimson characters. It was very impressive. It made quite the declaration, did it not? The gown was fashioned by Aurora James, a very gifted creator. Now, as we all realize, passes to the Met Gala cost a chilly $35,000 apiece. He extended the pictures so the crowd and the millions viewing at home could observe AOC in her frock, encircled by elite celebrities, camera flashes, and the type of opulence that characterizes the top 1%. Now you asserted at the moment that the pass was lent or presented to you, and the creator said you were her individual guest. That is acceptable. That is marvelous. But here is where my plain country attorney mind begins to get a bit bewildered." Senator Kennedy reached for his writing tablet, his stylus floating over the sheet like a medic about to perform the initial cut. "The Internal Revenue Service," he started, "these annoying little things called regulations, specifically regulations regarding presents and perks. You see, according to the tax statutes, anything exceeding a specific worth, presently $15,000, that is granted to a person has to be declared as income, and more significantly, it has to be taxed." He commenced to scribble in huge, daring figures on his tablet, angling it so the lenses could transmit the arithmetic to every family room in America. Let us perform some elementary calculation. We begin with the pass cost, $35,000. Then we possess that custom-built designer frock. Based on comparable items by that identical creator, we can cautiously gauge the value at somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000. Add in expert hair and cosmetics, which likely cost several thousand, and the distinct luxury adornments. Let us just name those a flat $5,000. When you sum it all together, we are gazing at a total worth of approximately $100,000 in complimentary goods and amenities supplied to you for that one solitary evening. Kennedy glanced up from his tablet, his gaze fastening onto AOC's. "Now, Representative, I have taken the freedom of searching through your financial declaration forms for the year 2021. As a member of Congress, those are public files. I have searched through every sheet, and I do not observe any declaring of these presents, not a solitary penny. Now, the tax responsibility on $100,000 of extra income at your particular tax bracket would be somewhere in the vicinity of $35,000 to $40,000. So my query is very straightforward. Did you remit taxes on this $100,000 present?" The quiet that ensued was dense and awkward for a few seconds. The sole noise was the dim buzz of the studio lamps. Kennedy did not permit the silence to shatter. He leaned into it, Let me ensure I am comprehending the visuals here accurately. You wore a Tax the Rich gown to a $35,000 per plate gala where you mingled with the very millionaires and billionaires you profess to loathe. You accepted roughly $100,000 worth of high-end items and premier experiences for free, and then you did not pay a cent in taxes on any of it. He placed his stylus down with a conclusive snap. Ma'am, to the median American, that does not appear like a political demonstration. That looks like tax avoidance with superior fashion taste. AOC finally recovered her voice, though it was higher and more taut than previously. The gown was lent for the function, she retorted rapidly. It was given back instantly afterward. It was not a present in the classic sense. It was a loan for a professional showing. Kennedy did not skip a beat. The $35,000 pass was not returned, was it? The expert cosmetics were not returned? The 5-course dinner was not returned? The experience of visiting the most exclusive party in the globe was not something you could hand back. He shook his head deliberately. And even if we speak just regarding the frock, the IRS does not actually care if you gave it back the subsequent morning. You received the full advantage and utility of wearing an $80,000 custom gown for the evening. I took the moment to speak to some tax lawyers about this, genuine ones, by the way, who earned much better than C+s in school. They informed me that if a boss or a patron loans you a $100,000 item for private use, even momentarily, the IRS regards that a taxable perk. It is exactly as if your superior loans you a luxury Ferrari for the weekend. You must report that as taxable pay. Kennedy flashed that perilous grin again, the one that indicated he was about to dispatch a finishing strike. But I assume when you are occupied making a grand public declaration about taxing other wealthy individuals, you do not feel the necessity to actually remit taxes yourself. It appears to be a vintage instance of rules for thee, but not for me. Now, what is the term I am seeking? Is hypocritical too intense? No, he halted, appearing to weigh it. I think that is precisely the correct term for it. The conservative section of the crowd was absolutely adoring it, while the progressive side looked like they had just been collectively struck. AOC attempted to answer, trying to pivot the chat back to the wider, more theoretical matters of wealth disparity and the structural issues of the tax code. But Kennedy was already proceeding to his subsequent exhibit. Oh, and just one additional thing on this subject, he added almost effortlessly as he rearranged his papers. You know who truly understands the details of tax statute regarding presents and perks? Economists, genuine ones, people who actually researched the topic and comprehended the content. I am sure you intended well, Representative, but desiring to tax the wealthy is a lot simpler than actually obeying the tax statutes yourself. Is it not? Jake Tapper, sensing the necessity to move away from AOC's private finances, tried desperately to alter the subject. Senator Kennedy, let us discuss job generation and economic growth, he said, wishing to locate a topic that would center on policy rather than personality. Kennedy practically leaped in his chair. Splendid. Let us discuss Amazon, he stated, his voice overflowing with zeal. Representative, you are from New York's 14th District. You famously assisted in killing the Amazon HQ2 agreement that was scheduled for Queens. I recall it clearly because you cheered that result like you had just won the Super Bowl. Let us discuss that massive victory of yours. AOC aligned her stance, visibly eased to be back on what she deemed her home ground. That arrangement was nothing more than corporate charity, she declared resolutely. We were ready to hand over $3 billion in public funds to the wealthiest man in the globe, while our academies and transit systems are decaying. It was a position for the community. Halt right there, Kennedy said, holding up a palm. That sentence right there is where we need to have a little instructional moment, because that solitary statement exposes a foundational, deep-seated misinterpretation of how economics actually functions. A misinterpretation that regrettably cost your own voters 25,000 high-wage occupations. He retrieved a detailed breakdown of the Amazon Pact. Amazon was scheming to construct its second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. They predicted generating between 25 and 40,000 roles over the next decade, with a median wage of $150,000 a year. In exchange, the state and city offered $3 billion in tax inducements over 10 years. Kennedy turned his head to look directly into the lens. Now, everyone viewing at home, I want you to comprehend something very elementary. Tax inducements are not currency. Representative Ocasio-Cortez genuinely believed and told the populace that New York was writing Jeff Bezos a $3 billion check. She believed there was a stack of $3 billion resting in a bank account somewhere that she could abruptly expend on schools or subways once the deal was dead. He turned back to her. But that is not how it operates, is it? Can you explain to this audience right now what a tax incentive actually is? AOC began to falter through an explanation about tax breaks and corporate giveaways, her voice lacking the certainty she had possessed moments before. Kennedy let her conclude, then began to amend her with the tolerant, slightly disillusioned tone of a professor dealing with a pupil who had not reviewed the syllabus. A tax incentive implies Amazon would have paid less in taxes than they otherwise would have, Kennedy clarified. The key phrase is, than they otherwise would have. If Amazon does not come to New York gets zero tax dollars from Amazon. Zero. If Amazon comes to New York with incentives, New York gets some tax dollars from Amazon, just not as much as they would have without the incentives. And as anyone who completed middle school realizes, some is significantly more than zero. He raised an economic assessment. Economists, real ones, the ones who earned better than C+s, examined this specific deal. They discovered that Amazon would have produced roughly $27 billion in new tax revenue for the state and city over 10 years. The incentives would have cost $3 billion in uncollected potential revenue. That is a net gain of $24 billion. That is $24 billion that could have gone to those schools, subways, and infrastructure projects you cited, but instead, you obtained nothing. Kennedy withdrew another collection of data. But it becomes even worse. Those 25,000 jobs with a median salary of $150,000. That is $3.75 billion in annual wages just from direct employment. Then you possess the indirect jobs, the eateries, the dry cleaners, the coffee shops, the construction laborers. Economists gauged another 67,000 jobs would have been generated in the surrounding ecosystem. He gazed at AOC with a look that bordered on sympathy. You slaughtered 92,000 potential jobs because you believed tax incentives were actual liquid cash. You rejoiced at saving $3 billion that did not exist while simultaneously forfeiting $24 billion that would have existed. And do you desire to know the most ironic portion? He retrieved a final document for this round. Amazon still opened facilities in New York. They just did not open them in Queens. They did not open them in your district. So you did not stop Amazon. You just stopped your own neighbors from acquiring those fine jobs. Staten Island obtained an Amazon facility. The Bronx obtained one. Your district obtained absolutely nothing except a higher jobless rate. He leaned inward, his voice deep and steady. Ma'am, you believed incentives were money in a vault. That is not a policy disagreement or a different vision. That is a failure to grasp the most elementary concepts of economic expansion, and 25,000 families paid the ultimate price for your C-plus comprehension. The room was deathly quiet. Even the progressive activists in the front row found it difficult to cheer. The accuracy with which Kennedy had laid out the math made the victory look like a self-inflicted injury. And for the record, Kennedy added quietly, $150,000 a year is not the rich in New York City. That is a distinct instructor wed to a firefighter. That is 2 nurses. Those were laboring households who could have purchased residences and dispatched children to university. You labeled them jobs for the wealthy and killed them because you failed Econ 101. The strain in the studio had transitioned from a political disagreement to something closer to a forensic audit. Senator Kennedy reached into his pile and produced a relatively slender document, barely 14 pages long. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he said, holding it up like a piece of proof. This is your hallmark legislation, the Green New Deal. I read the complete thing, all 14 pages of it. It took me about 8 minutes. To be honest, I have read Chinese food menus that were more detailed and better thought out. He began leafing through the pages, which were heavily marked with yellow highlighter and red ink. This document is quite the masterwork of imagination. It pledges to make America carbon neutral in just 10 years. It guarantees a high-paying role for every single person who desires one. It pledges universal health care, free college for all, and my personal favorite, the retrofitting or total rebuilding of every single building in the United States to meet new green standards. It is aspiring, I will grant you that. But what I found most captivating about this document is not what is in it, but what is missing. A cost estimate. There is not even a rough guess, just big, beautiful, expensive promises. Kennedy leaned inward, his voice dropping into that serious, plain country attorney tone. So I did what you apparently forgot to do. I asked some economists, real ones again, to estimate what this wish list would actually cost the American taxpayer. Do you desire to hear their numbers? He did not wait for her to answer. The American Action Forum calculated it would cost roughly $93 trillion over the first 10 years. The Heritage Foundation and other groups placed it in the same ballpark, with even liberal-leaning think tanks admitting it would cost at least $40 trillion. Let us be generous and split the difference. Let us call it $70 trillion. He began writing on his legal pad again, the scratching of his pen audible in the silent room. $70 trillion over 10 years is $7 trillion per year. For context, the entire federal revenue for 2022, every cent we collected in income taxes, corporate taxes, and payroll taxes was about $4.4 trillion. Your plan, Representative, costs significantly more per year than the entire United States government actually collects. So the obvious question is, how do you plan to pay for it? AOC shifted in her seat, trying to regain her footing. We would tax billionaires, close corporate loopholes, and stop our wasteful military spending, she began, falling back on her standard rhetorical defense. Let us do the math on that, Kennedy interrupted, not looking up from his pad. The total net worth, not income, but total wealth, of every American billionaire combined is approximately $4.5 trillion. If we literally seized every single penny they owned, leaving them completely destitute and on the street, we could fund your plan for exactly 7 months. Then what? Closing every corporate loophole might generate another $100 billion a year if we are fortunate. The entire military budget is about $700 billion, and I do not think you are proposing to leave our borders completely undefended. Even if you did, we are still short about $6 trillion every single year. Where is that money coming from? AOC tried to pivot toward modern monetary theory, suggesting that the government could print the necessary funds. Kennedy listened with a look of feigned interest before dismantling the logistics with cold, hard numbers. But the money is not even the most ridiculous part, Kennedy said, tossing his pen onto the pad. Let us talk about reality. Your plan promises to retrofit or rebuild every building in America in 10 years. There are approximately 136 million buildings in this country. To do that in a decade, you have 3,650 days. That means your plan requires us to retrofit or rebuild 37,000 buildings every single day, including weekends and holidays, for 10 years straight. He gazed at her over his spectacles. Ma'am, there are not enough construction workers in America to do that. There are not enough raw materials on the planet. The supply chains do not exist. The training programs do not exist. And the laws of physics do not allow it. He withdrew a map. You also promised to eliminate air travel and replace it with high-speed rail. The distance from New York to Los Angeles is 2,800 miles. Even the fastest high-speed rail in the world, in China, tops out around 200 miles per hour. That is a 14-hour train ride. Nobody is going to choose a 14-hour train ride over a 5-hour flight. You are not eliminating air travel. You are just destroying business, tourism, and family visits. He pointed to the rail requirements. To build the 30,000 miles of rail your plan requires in 10 years, we would have to lay 8 miles of track every single day. China, with an authoritarian government and zero environmental reviews, only manages about 1,000 miles per year. Do you honestly think America is going to build 3 times faster while dealing with union labor, environmental impact statements, and local zoning boards? Kennedy set the map down with a heavy thud. Your plan requires solar panels covering an area larger than the state of Texas, battery technology that has not even been invented yet at this scale, and a complete government takeover of every transportation system in the country. This is not a policy proposal, Representative. This is a child's letter to Santa Claus. You have promised every toy in the store, but you have not explained how Santa is going to manufacture them, how the reindeer are going to deliver them, or who is paying for the workshop. Because you do not understand economics, you do not understand logistics, and you do not seem to understand reality. We have to be ambitious if we are going to survive climate change, AOC protested, her voice rising in frustration. There is a difference between being ambitious and being delusional, Kennedy replied flatly. Ambitious was John F. Kennedy saying we would go to the moon and then presenting a detailed engineering and financial plan for how to do it. Delusional is promising to eliminate airplanes and rebuild every house in the country in 10 years with no plan, no technology, and no money. You wrote a wish list and had the audacity to call it legislation. Senator Kennedy paused to take a sip from his I Heart Capitalism mug. Letting the weight of the previous round sink in, AOC was visibly rattled. Her responses were becoming shorter, more defensive, and her gaze was shifting more frequently to her staff in the wings. Kennedy, however, looked like he was just getting his second wind. "Representative," he said, leaning back comfortably, "you talk a lot about income inequality. You speak passionately about how the rich are getting richer, while working people are struggling just to keep their heads above water. You have built your entire political brand on the idea that we need to aggressively redistribute wealth. I would like to talk about your personal wealth for a moment." He pulled out a set of financial disclosure forms. When you were first elected in 2018, your disclosure showed you had about $15,000 in total savings. That was it. You told the world you were living paycheck to paycheck, a true representative of the working class. It was a compelling story. He looked up from the papers, his eyes narrowing slightly. But let us look at your life now, Representative. What kind of car do you drive? AOC hesitated, her jaw tightening. I do not see how my personal transportation is relevant to a debate on national economic policy, she countered. It is a Tesla, is it not? Kennedy said, not waiting for an answer. He pulled out several photos. Specifically, a Tesla Model 3. It is a very nice car. I took the liberty of looking up the pricing. A base model starts around $40,000, but the one you are driving in these photos, with the specific features and wheels visible here, probably cost closer to $50,000. My question is simple. How did a working-class hero afford a $50,000 luxury electric vehicle so quickly? I make a congressional salary, AOC replied sharply. I work hard for that income. You certainly do make a congressional salary, Kennedy agreed with a nod. You make $174,000 a year. Now for the folks watching at home who might not have their calculators handy, that puts you comfortably in the top 10% of all American earners by every objective metric in this country. Representative, you are the rich you keep talking about taxing. But let us look at your overhead. He began scribbling on his legal pad again. You maintain an apartment in Washington, D.C. You live in the Navy Yard neighborhood, which is quite trendy. Rent there for a place like yours runs between $3,000 and $4,000 a month. You also have to maintain a residence back in New York, which is not cheap. You travel frequently, you wear high-end designer clothes to public events, and you clearly have a budget for professional hair and makeup. When I add up your likely required expenses, you are looking at $8,000 to $10,000 a month in lifestyle costs. That is roughly $120,000 a year right there. He tapped his pen against the pad. Then you have your taxes on a $174,000 salary. You are paying about $40,000 in federal and state income taxes. So if we do the math, out of your salary, you are spending heavily on your lifestyle and your tax obligations. That leaves you with little for savings. And yet you went from $15,000 in total savings to owning a $50,000 luxury car in just a few years. Where did the extra money come from? AOC's face flushed a deep shade of red. I am fiscally responsible with my personal finances, she stated, her voice trembling slightly. I am sure you are, Kennedy said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. But the math only adds up if we look at your other income streams. Oh, wait, he pulled out yet another document. Book deals, speaking fees. You wrote a book about being working class while making $174,000 a year. That is quite the hustle, I must say. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide. Here is my point, Representative. You make more money than 90% of the people in this country. You drive a luxury electric car. You live in expensive, exclusive neighborhoods in two of the costliest cities on the planet. You wear designer labels and attend gala events. You are, by any definition, wealthy, but you have built your entire public persona on pretending you are still the girl behind the bar. He held up a photo of her behind the wheel of the Tesla. You cannot be rich and pretend you are poor. You cannot drive a $50,000 car and claim to be the voice of the people riding the city bus. You cannot make more money than 9 out of 10 Americans and call yourself working class. That is not representation, ma'am. That is false advertising. I came from a working-class background, AOC protested, her voice rising. My father was an architect. I worked as a bartender. And now you are rich. Congratulations, Kennedy interrupted, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "That is the American dream. You worked hard, you moved up, and you have made a very good life for yourself. I am genuinely happy for your success, but you cannot have it both ways. You cannot enjoy every single benefit of the capitalist system while claiming to oppose it. You need to pick a lane, Representative. Are you the rich elite, or are you the working class? Because your Tesla says rich, but your rhetoric says poor. And in the real world of economics, you simply cannot be both." Senator Kennedy took a long, measured pause, adjusting his glasses as the atmosphere in the room shifted. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he began, "let us talk about your grandmother. This one is a bit more personal, and I think it is important because it speaks to the very heart of how you view the people you claim to represent." AOC's expression tightened instantly. She knew this territory well, but the look in Kennedy's eyes suggested he had done his homework far more thoroughly than any previous opponent. After the devastating impact of Hurricane Maria on Puerto Rico in 2017, you spoke frequently and very emotionally about the suffering of your family on the island. You painted a harrowing picture for your millions of followers. You said your grandmother was living in truly terrible, squalid conditions. A damaged roof that leaked, no consistent power for years, and inadequate access to basic necessities like food and water. You were visibly moved when you spoke about it, and quite frankly, the American people were moved too. It was a compelling, heartbreaking story of a family left behind by the government. He pulled out a series of printed tweets from June 2021. In these posts, you blamed the Trump administration entirely for her continued suffering years after the storm had passed. You called it a national disgrace that an American citizen was living in such conditions. It was a powerful narrative, and it did exactly what you wanted. It went viral, it sparked outrage, and it framed you as a fighter for the vulnerable. Kennedy held up another document, this one a press clipping. And that is when Matt Walsh, a conservative commentator you certainly do not agree with, decided to take you at your word. He thought, if this woman is suffering as badly as the representative says, we should help her. He organized a GoFundMe campaign, and within hours, regular Americans donated over $100,000, specifically for your grandmother to fix her roof, restore her power, and ensure she was safe. Kennedy looked over the top of his glasses, his voice hardening. And you know what you did? You refused the money. Your office released a statement calling the fundraiser a stunt. You said it was offensive and that your family did not need help from conservatives. You turned away $100,000 in actual, tangible aid from people who genuinely wanted to help a suffering elderly woman simply because the money came from the wrong political team. But here is the real kicker, Representative. He pulled out a final set of articles and photos. Reporters actually went to Puerto Rico to check on your grandmother. They found the house you had described as a ruin. And do you know what they discovered? The house was fine. The repairs had been completed long ago. Your grandmother was living comfortably surrounded by family. She even told the reporters herself that she was doing okay and that she had everything she needed. So let us look at the math here. You told the country she was suffering to score political points. When people offered actual money to fix the problem you claimed existed, you rejected it because accepting it would have ruined your narrative. And it turns out the crisis was largely a fabrication for the cameras. Kennedy leaned forward, the simple country lawyer persona replaced by a cold prosecutorial focus. That is not advocacy, Representative. That is exploitation. You used your own grandmother's life as a political prop. You exaggerated her suffering to get attention for yourself, and when actual help was offered, you prioritized your brand over her well-being. You had a choice. You could have accepted the help, thanked the donors, and shown the world that Americans can put politics aside to help each other. Instead, you insulted the donors and kept the suffering story alive as long as it was useful to you. It tells us everything we need to know about your priorities. It is not about helping people. It is about looking like you are helping people while the cameras are rolling. AOC tried to jump in, her voice crackling with indignation. I was making a broader point about the systemic failure of the government's response, she shouted. But Kennedy was already shaking his head, cutting her off before she could regain her rhythm. You do not make a broader point by lying about your own family's situation, ma'am. You do not create a crisis that does not exist just to make your opponents look bad. That is called a lack of integrity, and no amount of Twitter followers can fix that. You chose the narrative over the truth, and tonight, the receipts have finally caught up with you. The audience was gasping at the precision of the attack. Even the progressive side of the room was notably quiet now. Kennedy, meanwhile, looked completely unfazed, already reaching for the next folder in his stack. And folks, he said, looking at the camera with a wry smile, we have 3 more rounds to go. Do not go anywhere. Jake Tapper looked like he was reconsidering his career choices as he tried to regain control. But Senator Kennedy was now the undisputed conductor of the evening. Representative, Kennedy said, his tone shifting back to a conversational, almost curious register. Where exactly do you live when you are working for the people in Washington, D.C.? AOC, sensing another trap but unable to avoid the question, answered cautiously. I have an apartment in the Navy Yard district, as you mentioned earlier. It is a standard arrangement for members of Congress who have to maintain 2 residences. Kennedy did not miss a beat. Let us talk about that specific building. It is a brand-new luxury development built in 2018. It features a stunning rooftop pool, a state-of-the-art fitness center, a yoga studio, a residence lounge, a full concierge service, and a secure parking garage. It is, by any definition, an elite living space. He pulled out the rental listings for her specific floor plan. Rent for a 1-bedroom in your building runs between $3,000 and $4,000. For a 2-bedroom, you are looking at $6,000. Now hey, you work hard, you are in the top 10% of earners, and you deserve nice things. That is the American way. His expression then turned pointedly sharp. But here is what is interesting, Representative. This building is exactly the kind of luxury development that you have spent your entire career opposing in your own district in Queens. You have stood on street corners and told your constituents that buildings like this are instruments of gentrification. You have claimed they displace working people and destroy the fabric of local communities. But the moment you got a taste of that congressional salary, you moved into one yourself. So my question is, are luxury apartments only immoral when they are being built in Queens, or do they suddenly become essential when they have a rooftop pool that you want to use? He pulled out her voting and advocacy records from 2019. In your own district, a similar waterfront development was proposed. It was a beautiful project that would have brought investment and housing to the area. You fought it tooth and nail. You said it would gentrify the neighborhood and push out working families. The project was successfully blocked. And yet, while you were blocking housing for your neighbors, you were signing a lease for a luxury unit in D.C. with the exact same amenities. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, devastating rumble. Your building in D.C. has strict security, key fob access, cameras, and controlled entry. There are no homeless shelters nearby. In fact, your building's management has actively lobbied against affordable housing developments in the immediate area. You know why? Because the people who pay $4,000 a month for a luxury view do not want affordable housing next door. It affects property values. Did you speak out against that? Did you use your massive platform to demand that your building accept Section 8 vouchers? Or did you just enjoy your rooftop pool in peace, while the working class you represent struggled to find a place to live back home? AOC opened her mouth to defend herself, but Kennedy held up a hand, silencing her. There is more. Your building was constructed by non-union labor. The development company has a long and documented history of fighting unionization efforts. You have gone on record 100 times saying every major construction project in America should be union-only, but you chose to live in and pay rent to a company that represents everything you claim to stand against. It seems your principles are very firm when they apply to other people's businesses, but they get a little flexible when it comes to your own comfort. Representative, that is not democratic socialism. That is classic limousine liberalism with a better Instagram filter. Where I choose to live is a personal safety and personal lifestyle choice, AOC protested, her face now a mixture of shock and sheer humiliation. It is personal until you make housing policy your primary political weapon, Kennedy shot back with lightning speed. You cannot live in the height of luxury while demanding everyone else accept Section 8 housing in their backyards. You cannot enjoy a private fitness center while calling luxury developments immoral. You cannot benefit from the efficiency of non-union construction while demanding that every other worker in America be forced into a union. That is the definition of hypocrisy, and tonight you have mastered it. Senator Kennedy took a moment to organize his final set of documents, his movements deliberate and methodical. This was the moment the audience had been waiting for, the closing argument of a systematic dismantling. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he began, his voice dropping into a low, serious tone that commanded the entire room's attention. Let us talk about small businesses. You know, the backbone of the American economy, the engine that creates the majority of new jobs in this country, the place where the vast majority of your constituents actually go to work every morning. How do you truly feel about the men and women who risk everything to open a shop or a local service? AOC, looking exhausted and deeply defensive, gave a generic rehearsed answer. I support our small business owners and entrepreneurship as a path to community wealth, she said, though the words lacked their usual fire. Kennedy smiled, but there was no warmth in it this time. That is a real nice sentiment, ma'am. It truly is. But here is the problem. Your voting record tells a completely different story. It tells a story of a politician who talks like a friend of the worker, but acts like the worst nightmare of the person who actually signs the paychecks. He pulled out a comprehensive legislative analysis. Since you entered Congress in 2019, there have been 17 major bills specifically designed to provide relief, regulatory reform, or capital access to small businesses. Do you want to take a guess at how many of those 17 bills you actually voted for? He did not wait for her to guess. 2. You voted for exactly 2 out of 17. That is an 11% support rate for the very people you claim to represent. You opposed 15 different pieces of legislation that were crafted to help the little guy stay afloat in an increasingly difficult economy. Kennedy began pulling specific examples from his file. Let us look at H.R. 1994, the Small Business Relief Act. It provided targeted tax relief for businesses with fewer than 50 employees. You voted no. Let us look at H.R. 7010, the Paycheck Protection Program extension. The very program that kept millions of Americans employed during the height of the pandemic. You voted no. H.R. 2870, which reduced the red tape for small business loans. You voted no on that one, too. He looked up from the list, his eyes piercing. Why? Why would someone who claims to be a champion of the working class vote against the very tools that keep those people's workplaces from going under? You claimed these bills had poison pills or corporate giveaways, but these were bills targeted specifically at companies with under 50 employees. We are talking about the bodega on the corner, the family-owned restaurant, the local bookstore. These are not the billionaires you rail against. These are your neighbors, and you turned your back on them every single time the roll was called. Kennedy then pulled out the most devastating data set of the night. And then came the pandemic. During those dark months, your district in New York lost 3,400 small businesses permanently. They are gone, and they are not coming back. And do you know who thrived while those family businesses were dying? The big chains. Target stayed open. Walmart stayed open. Amazon's profits reached the stratosphere. You supported the most draconian lockdowns. You supported keeping the non-essential local shops closed. And then you opposed the relief bills that would have given them a fighting chance to weather the storm. You stood by while 3,400 dreams disappeared in your district. And you know who the ultimate winner was? The big corporations you claim to oppose. You did more for Jeff Bezos's market share in 1 year than a decade of Republican tax cuts ever could. He leaned forward, his voice rising in power. You have never run a business, Representative. You have never hired a single soul. You have never sat up at 3 in the morning wondering how you are going to make payroll on Friday. You have never had to look an employee in the eye and tell them you cannot give them a raise, because the government just piled on another mountain of regulations or hiked your taxes again. You have never worried about competition from a multi-billion-dollar corporation with deeper pockets and more lawyers than you have employees. But you sit in that air-conditioned office in D.C. and vote to make life harder for the people who actually do those things. You vote to raise their costs, you vote to increase their red tape, and you vote against every effort to give them a level playing field. And you do it all while wearing a tax-the-rich dress and calling yourself a champion of the people. Kennedy's voice then dropped to a whisper, which somehow made it even more devastating. Small businesses are not just statistics on a page, Representative. They are the immigrant family running a grocery store. They are the single mom who started a cleaning service to provide for her kids. They are the American dream in its purest form. And your policies, backed by your C+ understanding of economics, are killing that dream. Your father was a small business owner. He ran an architecture firm. He knew the risk, the sweat, and the sacrifice it took to build something. And somehow, his daughter grew up to become the greatest threat to small business in the United States Congress. He gathered his final documents, the room so silent you could hear the cameras clicking. You have never created a job. You have never made anything except speeches. But you have used your power to crush the people who actually build this country. You have helped the big corporations destroy their local competition, and you have had the nerve to call it progress. Representative, the working class does not work for billionaires in ivory towers. They work for the small businesses on Main Street. And you are putting them out of business one vote at a time.